Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Lamed Tet. We are at the Mishnah near the bottom of Kuf Lamed Chet and Bet. And we'll just go ahead and dive right in because the Mishnah sort of stands on its own, or at least, well, you know what? The perfect segue is actually to learn the Rashbam on the Mishnah. So let's go, before we even actually open the Mishnah, let's go to the beginning of the Rashbam. We'll keep a finger in the Rashbam and then a finger in the text so that we can go back and forth. So Av Tolish Umachil, that's what the Rashbam says. That's the first words of our Mishnah. Aha Kosev Nechasav Livno La'achar Moso Kai. That this Mishnah is referring to a situation where somebody has written his assets over to his son for after he dies. Meaning, as we've seen previously, the essence of the property, the underlying earth, so to speak, has been transferred, but the rights to the produce slash fruit, that is being held on by the father. That the underlying asset itself has been transferred from today. Uperi la'achar misa, and the fruit are only going to transfer after the death of the father. The father wants to be able to continue to enjoy the fruit during the rest of his life. The hilkach, and now let's take a look. Now that we have that background, what's the next word? So ab tolish umachil. So now you know what? We'll read the whole Rashbam, and then we'll see it inside in the Mishnah afterwards. The hilkach. Now 4 lines up from the bottom of the Rashbam, the beginning of the line. Hilkach ma'achil ha'ab b'chayav peros shetalash l'kol misha yirtza. As a result, the father who has the rights to the fruit has the ability to take whatever cut fruit exists and give it to whomever he wants. But anything that remains attached to the ground, b'shas mitaso, at the time of his death, aval pisha omid l'talish, even though it is capable of being removed, hareyehu shel beno, now it belongs to the son. Mikabel matana, the one who received the gift during the father's life. The davka beno, and it's specifically that son. Aval hakosev nechasav la'acher. Oh, I'm sorry, and it's specifically if you were to write over your assets to your son. Aval hakosev nechasav la'acher. What if you were to write over your assets to somebody else? So again, same situation. You write the assets as a gift to somebody for after you die. They get the underlying ground immediately, and they're only going to get the fruit after you die. In that situation, afilu ma shehenich mechuber lekarka. In that situation, even what remains attached to the ground, b'shas misaso, at the time of death, harehen shel yorshim, they belong to the heirs and not to the recipient of the gift, because they are ready to be cut. Shidato shel adam krova etzel beno. A person has a special connection with their descendants, with their children, with their son. Yoter me'aker, more than with somebody else. And that's the implication of the Gemara. So we now have a direction of where everything is going to take us. So now let's go back into the Mishnah and take us through. Ha'av tolish umachel. The father can cut and feed, meaning that he can take produce that is done on the field and he can give it to somebody other than the son to whom he's given the field. And that's because he has retained the right to the produce during his lifetime. L'kol misha yirtza. And he can feed it to anybody who he wants. Umasha hiniyach talush, but whatever remains connected, namely at his death, harehu shel yorshin. I'm sorry, umasha hiniyach talush, and what remains uncut after the father's death. So, remains cut, excuse me. Whatever remains cut after the father's death. I want to clarify that. Whatever remains cut after the father's death, harehu shel yorshin. That belongs to the heirs, not to this specific son. Take a look at the last Rashbam on the Mishnah, the second to last line. V'lo l'makabel matana levado. It doesn't go specifically to that son. So let's go through it. I have a field. somebody has, Yaakov has a field, and he's written the field over to Yosef, and now the field has on it, and now Yaakov has passed away, and he has on it proper fruit that's still attached to the trees and fruit that has been cut. The fruit that is still attached to the trees all goes to Yosef because he wrote over the property to Yosef. But what was detached from the trees, and Yaakov has never had a chance to either eat it or to give it away, that is going to go to all of Yaakov's children, to all of the heirs. And so as a result, Reuven, Shimon, Yehuda, etc., Levi, all of them are going to share from this cut fruit. They will all participate in the cut fruit, and Yosef will be able to keep all the fruit that is connected to the land. Okay, so what's the implication? So that's where the Mishnah, the Gemara picks up. So the Gemara picks up Talosh ein mechuber lo. The implication is that the only thing that the heirs will get is the detached fruit, not the attached fruit. And so as a result, but we have V'hatanya as we turn to Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Aleph. We have a brisa that seems to suggest otherwise. Shaman es hamechubarin lelokeach. We estimate the value of the produce that is attached for the buyer. Now, what does that mean? Thankfully, Rashbam helps us out. V'hatanya shaman es hamechubarin lelokeach. Top Rashbam on Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Aleph. Ubetosefta de ketubot hi shnuya makar haben umeta av. That in the Tosefta in Ketubot, it teaches that if a son sells and then the father dies. So again, Yaakov has given his property for after he dies to Yosef, and now Yosef sells it to David. Im yesh b'nechasim mechubarim lekarkos. If there is at the time of Yaakov's death any produce that is ready to be cut and is still attached to the ground, shaminlo, we estimate its value. And maybe even if it's not ready to be cut, we estimate the value of the produce, because the implication is that when and this seems to be disagreeing with our Mishnah, the implication is that when Yosef sells the produce to David, he ends up selling only the ground. I'm sorry, when he sells the ground to David and he sells all of his rights to David, he's selling only the ground. And anything that is ready to be detached or attached to the ground after the death of the father or at the time of the death of the father, that is going to need to be paid for separately, because that belongs to all of the heirs and not just to Yosef. Ula Elmina, and earlier than that in this Tosefta in Ketubot, Kitani Hakosif Kol Nechasav Libno. And we've seen, as we saw here, we saw that if you write over your nechasim to your son, you have to write from today and after my death. Uperusha hakosev kol nechasim me'ayom l'achar miso libno v'halach oto haben umakar hanechasim. And we said that we're talking about, and we explained that the situation over there is where a son was, Yosef got the field because it was written over to him from today and after the death of Yaakov. And now Yosef goes and he sells it, as I said, to David. And while Yaakov is still alive, Yosef sells it. And after some amount of time, Yaakov passes away. So Zaka halokech b'masha makar lo. What the buyer buys, what David has bought from Yosef, is only the ground, the essence of the ground itself, not anything on the ground. If there's fruit that's attached to the ground, that was not acquired by David. He only gets the ground itself. Aval bepeirot, those fruit, aval gata mechubarin, even though they're attached, hain liyorshin hain, they go to the heirs. Lefikach, and that's why, therefore, l'shaman osan l'lokeach, we have to estimate their value for the purchaser. And therefore, the purchaser will need to v'nosin demeyan liyorshin. If the purchaser wants to keep all that fruit, he's going to need to pay that amount of money to the heirs. Okay, and so what do we see? We see that here the attached produce goes to the heirs and not to the recipient of the gift. So doesn't that contradict our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah implied that what was attached went to the recipient of the gift. So Amar Ula lo kasha kan bivno kan ba'achar. So one situation is when the recipient of the gift, or when the person who's taking it is the son, and another situation is when it's somebody else. Adam krova eitzel beno, because a person's relationship with their son is closer than with somebody else. So let's take a look in the Rashbam. Kan ba'acher. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down into the narrow lines of the Rashbam. At the end of the line, Shemakru haben la'achar b'chayeyav. That when you have somebody else, such as where the son has sold the rights to somebody else while the father is still living, so then the recipient, the buyer of those rights, only is going to get the rights to the land itself and not to the produce, because that's what the father would want. V'hu adin im kasvu ha'av la'achar me'hayom la'achar misa. And the same thing would apply, according to the Rashbam, if you were to write it directly to the third party, if the father were to write it directly to David. So if Yaakov, who's not related to David, writes over to David saying, I'm going to give you my field after I die. I'm giving you a field today, but it's the produce is for you after I die. So then she'ein lo chelik b'mechubarin. When Yaakov dies, David, who's the recipient, only gets the field itself and not the produce that's attached to the field. And again, it's based on this concept that we said, the last words before this next Mishnah, that a person has a special relationship with their son, with their children. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. So the next Mishnah, which is the last Mishnah of this chapter, addresses how sons and daughters divide an estate when no special provision has been established. So let's take a look. If a father leaves over sons that are older and sons that are younger, the older ones cannot take from and support themselves from the younger ones. What does that mean? Take a look in the Rashbam. Misparnasim levush v'kusus. It's talking about wearing for clothing and for outerwear. V'lo akatanim nizonim al hagadolim. And similarly, the younger ones can't be fed using the money of the older ones. And this is talking about where all the money has been undivided, meaning that we have yet to distribute the money among the heirs. So it's still one big pot. Elachokin b'shaveh. Rather, everybody gets equally. The bottom line here is what it's trying to touch on is the fact that the older sons might say, well, we have a justification to get paid more because at the moment we need more money. And the younger ones could say, well, we have a justification to get paid more because we need food. So it doesn't make a difference. The justifications don't matter. Rather, everybody gets an equal piece. Nasu hagadolim, what happens if the older ones got married? And the Gemara will explain that we're talking about, actually, let's take a look in the Rashbam because he'll tell us it right now. Nasu hagadolim, so it's now about midway in the narrow lines of the Rashbam, maybe a little bit further than midway. Nasu gedolim nashim, they marry women. V'asu tzarkei chuppah mitefusas habayis la'achar misas avihen, and they use the funds of the house after the death of their father, the combined estate, the undivided estate. They use those funds in order to get married. Kodem Chaluka, before it was all divided. Yisu Gama Katanim Kamokain Kodem Chaluka. So too now the younger ones have that same right to get a piece of the undivided estate before they divide it up. So basically, if they do divide it up, they need to also get the funds that would be necessary in order for them to get married. So again, Yusu Hakatanim. So then, as a result, the younger ones also get to get married. V'im Amru Katanim, and if the younger one said, "Hare anu nosim kederach shenasatem atem," we want to marry in the same way that you got married. Ein shomin lahem. We don't listen to them. Now, what exactly this means and how we understand it relative to the words that we just said, the Gemara is going to clarify. But the bottom line is that what it really means, if it's take a look in the next Rashbam, im amru ketanim la'achar misas avihen, after the death of their father. So the ketanim are saying this after their father has passed away. Hare anu nosim ata. We want to marry now. Atem avinu, the way you got married in our father's lifetime. So you got a wedding at a beautiful wedding hall when our father was still alive. We want that same right. So ein shomen lahem. We do not listen to them. Elamasha nasan lahem aviem nasan. Whatever has been given to the older sons is already given. And that's already, it's not, and that will not factor in to our estate planning. So the bottom line is that if you gave something to an older child that you want to ensure is also given to a younger child, and is not counted towards that younger child's portion of your estate, you need to do it during your lifetime. But otherwise, anything that happened during the father's lifetime is ignored, and everybody gets an equal share of what's ever left, even though that whatever's left may have accounted for and may be lower because of a large gift that was given by a father to the son, such as a wedding. So, because that was pretty much one of the largest gifts that a father would give for a son. Okay, so that is the story with boys. Haniach banot gedolotu knanot. What about if there are girls? And we're not discussing boys and girls. That'll be the last piece. If there are girls and they're just younger and older girls, ina gedolos miparnasos al yedei katanos. Same as this situation. We're not going to let the older ones who need the clothing to use, to buy the clothing. And the younger ones don't get fed at the expense of the older ones. Elacholkot bashave. Everybody gets equally. Nasu gedolos, yisu katanos. If the older ones got married, again, using the undivided estate, so then the younger ones get to marry. But if they got married, if the older ones got married before the father passed away, im amru ketanos, and the younger ones say, "Hare anu nosus kedero shenasasem atem," we want to get married just like you. Ein shomen lehen. We don't listen to them because, again, the presents that are given by a father during the life of his children are given at that, don't get included in the division of the estate. Zech omer babanos mibabanim. Now, here is a stringency, an advantage, so to speak, of the daughters over the sons. Shahabanos nizonos al habanim, because daughters are fed at the expense of sons. Ve'ein nizonos al habanos, but they are not fed at the expense of daughters. And what do we mean by that? Well, let's take a look in the Rashbam. It's the first of the widest lines of the Rashbam, middle of the line, or towards the end of the line. Ve'ein nizonos habanos haketanos min hagadolos, that they are not. This is okay. I think this is actually on the earlier piece, that the younger ones are not fed from the older ones. Demamakom shehein yorshos kol hanechasim leka tanai ksuba demazon banan dik nukvin. That the point is that when we say that the younger ones are not fed at the expense of the daughters, it means that there is no condition that's associated with that situation that allows the younger ones to get fed at the expense of the older ones. But if, in fact, there are daughters and sons, well, then there's mazon banan nukvin, which is a condition in the ketubah, and the condition in the ketubah is that the daughters are going to get fed from the estate before any sons get any assets. And we're going to see that in more detail in the Gemara. So, okay, so now let's pick up with the Gemara. And the Gemara says, so the Gemara quotes a ruling that appears to contradict our Mishnah. So Rava says, Amar Rava, Hai Gadol Ache, Dilabash Ve'ikasim Mibesa, my Ovid Ovid. That if you have an older son, an oldest brother, and he takes clothing and outerwear from the house, meaning from the estate, my David Avid, what he's done is done, meaning that he shouldn't do it lechatchila, but bidi avad, it's considered as if he gets it. And let's take a look in the Gemara, in the Rashbam, middle of the second line. Gadol ache shenose v'nosein v'nechasem. He is doing the business of maintaining the assets of the estate. And therefore, there is a benefit to the other orphans. Ki michase belevushim naim, that he's wearing nice clothing. Ki hecha delishtamu milei, so that as a result, his words should be listened to. And so as a result, he's viewed as a more significant person. So this shows that an older brother can get clothed and cloaked from the estate, and yet our Mishnah seems to say not so. So that's where we're going to go next. Oh, so mind to Ovid, below Yitlu Kenegdo. What he gets, and the others don't get to take comparably. But as a result, but the Rashbam notes, the older brother shouldn't do this. But Tanan, 1 second, the Gemara asked, Ein Gedolim is Parnasin ala Katanim. We said that the older ones cannot get supported from the younger ones. So doesn't that contradict what Rava said? No, Masninim b'shircha, that our Mishnah is dealing with somebody who is always at rest. He's here they define it as an idler, somebody who's not busy. Look in Rashbam, Bashircha, end of the third line of the widest lines. Adam Batel, he's not very busy. She'ein lahem revach b'davar, because in that situation, the other brothers have no benefit. Well, 1 second, if they have no benefit, shircha pshita, I would think it would be obvious that he can't take any funds. So Gemara, back in the Gemara, so shircha pshita, right? I might have thought that would be obvious. So ma'adutema, what might I have thought? Nichalahu dilo ninval, that I might have thought that the other brothers wouldn't want any of their older brothers to look disgusting. So Kamash Malan, the Mishnah comes to teach us that even though that might be the case, that the brothers don't want any of their brothers to look disgusting, they don't, that does not give the older brothers the right to take any money away from the younger brothers. Okay, so that is a piece number one, that the oldest brother has some rights if he's taking care of the funds, but otherwise you don't get the division is even Steven, as they say. Nasu gedolim yisuk katanim. Right? Our Mishnah said that if the older ones get married, the younger ones get married. So my comer, what in the world does the Mishnah mean? After all, the next line in the Mishnah said that if the younger ones say we want to get married just like you, we don't listen to them. So what does it mean? So Amar Rav Yehuda Hachikamer. This is what it's telling us. Nasu gedolim la'achar misas avihen. If the older ones got married after the death of the father, so Yisuk Katanim la'achar misas avihen. Well, then the younger ones are also going to get married after the death of the father, meaning that they're all going to use funds from the undivided estate. Aval nasu gedolim b'chayei avihem. But if the older ones got married during the father's lifetime, v'amru ketanim la'achar misas avian, and now after the father has died, harei anu nosim, the younger ones say, harei anu nosim kederach nishinasasam atem, we want to marry just like you did. Ain shomin lahen. We don't listen to them. Elamasha nasan lahen avihen nasan. What was given by the father to the older brothers, that's already given, and it's no longer part of the estate, and it doesn't factor into the calculation of how we divide the estate. Okay, so that is the explanation of that piece. So now heniach banos gedolos uktanos. Now we say that if they left older and younger daughters. So shalach le Avua bar Gniva le Avua bar Gniva sent the following question to Rava. Yilamdenu Rabbeinu, can teach us our master. So lavsa v'achla, if a woman borrows money and she consumed that money, meaning she spent it, she doesn't have the money any longer, and now she gets married, Baalo keach habi o yoresh habi, is the new husband, is he a purchaser or an heir of the properties that she brings in to the estate? Now, why is that important? Because if, in fact, he is a purchaser, well, purchasers are not subject to a lien for an oral loan. And we understand that this loan that the woman borrowed from somebody else was an oral loan. There's no written evidence of the loan. And so as a result, the husband is not attributed knowledge of the loan, and therefore there's no encumbrance on any of the properties that he would take from his wife. Or is he treated like an heir of those properties? Because if he's treated like an heir of those properties, so then we'd say that an heir is responsible for even the oral loans made by borrowed by a father. So if a father borrows money and now passes away, the sons have an obligation to pay that money back from the property of the father, even though it's an oral loan. Even though if they had purchased the land from their father, they would not be obligated. So again, let's take a look now. The Avua bar Gniva explains, look, do we say that he's a purchaser? Umilva al peh eino gova min alakukos, and a lender who lent orally does not get to collect from purchasers. Odilma yorishavi umilva al peh govim in a yorshin. Or do we say that the husband is like an heir, and a lender has the right to collect from heirs? So Amrle, Rava said back, Tanina, we've got our Mishnah. Nasu gedolos yusu ketanos. If the older ones marry, then the younger ones get to marry. My lab, nasu gedolos leval. Doesn't this show that if the older ones get married to a husband, yisu ketanos mi baal, that the younger ones get married from properties that the older sisters put into control of their husbands, because that is part of the estate. So doesn't this show that the husband is considered an heir of the wife's property? So no, not necessarily. Lo, that's not actually necessarily a proof, because as the Gemara sort of questions it, nasu gedolos leval, yisu ketanos leval. 1 second. The older ones married husbands using undivided funds from the undivided estate. Let's say that the younger ones are using funds from the undivided estate. It doesn't have to be after the division. Well, Amy, is that really true that it has to all be undivided? And once it's divided up, the younger ones wouldn't be able to marry using the funds from the husbands? But Tani Rabbi Chia, nasu gedolos leval, yisu ketanos mibal. Rabbi Chia said exactly what we thought our Mishnah meant, that if in fact the older ones get married to husbands, the younger ones get married from those husbands, from assets that the older sisters brought into the marriage, because those funds really should have been part of the overall estate. And so even if the estate was already divided, they will get a piece of their weddings paid for from the money that the older sisters brought into their marriages. So Dilma Shiny Parnasa de Isla Kala. So, okay, you're absolutely right. We have now shown that a younger sister is effectively owed money by the husbands of an older sister if the older sister brought assets into that marriage from their father. But maybe that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about a situation where a woman borrows money orally before she gets married and then gets married, because maybe support for marriage is different from a loan. And so as a result, even though when it comes to a marriage, the younger sisters get to claim money away from the husband, maybe a lender would not be able to claim money away from the husband. So now we are going to try effort number 2. Okay, so effort number 2 is from Rav Papa. Amar le Rav Papa le Rava. Lav hainu deshalach Ravin ba'agarte. What about the letter that Ravin sent? Doesn't that show the answer? Misha Mace, when we had somebody who died, almana uvas, and he leaves over a widow and a daughter, almana nizonis minachasav, the widow gets to be fed from the estate. Nises habas, now when the daughter gets married, almanaso nizonis minachasav, the widow still gets to get fed from the estate, even though it's now under the control of the daughter's husband. Mesa Abbas, now the daughter dies, and so now effectively the husband has now inherited the entire estate. So doesn't that, and what happens? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Achoso shel Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, Al Yadi Hayama said it was this such a situation happened under my supervision, or I saw it happen. V'amru, and the rabbi said, the widow still gets fed from the estate, even though it is now inherited by the husband. So doesn't that show that the husband is an heir and not a purchaser? Because if you say that the husband is an heir, that's why the father's widow is still going to get fed from the estate. But if you're going to tell me that when a husband takes assets from his wife, he's a purchaser, why is the father's widow still getting fed from the estate? At that point, it's like trying to collect from a purchaser, and a purchaser doesn't have to pay for an unsecured loan, and this is essentially an unsecured loan, an unsecured commitment. So Amar Abaye, Ilav deshalach Ravin ana lo yadinan. 1 second, even without Ravin's message, I would know that a husband is treated like an heir, because listen to the following Mishnah. V'hatanan, we have a Mishnah in Bechoros, Daf Nun Bet Amud Bet. Elohein she'ein chosrin biyovel. This is the assets that don't go back to the original owner at Yovel. And what are they? Habechora, the portion that a firstborn gets, and as we turn to Kuf Lamed Tet Amud Bet, v'hayoresh es ishto, and one who inherits his wife. So we see that as somebody who inherits his wife is treated like an heir, not a purchaser. Because if they were treated like a purchaser, well, then the assets would need to go back to their original owner at Yovel. So Amar le Rava, v'hashta deshalach miyadinan. Well, 1 second. Actually, none of this is a good proof. Because would we really know that even based on Ravin's letter, that in fact the husband is treated like an heir? Because Ha'amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yossi the son of Rabbi Chanina said, Be'usha hitkinu, they had a takana in Usha, that Ha'isha shemachra nisei malog b'chaye bala umesa habal motzi miyad halakuchos, that if a woman sells her malog property, and we'll discuss exactly what that is in just a moment, umesa, and then she dies before the husband, habal motzi miyad halakuchos, the husband gets to take it away from the purchasers, meaning that the husband is effectively like a buyer. He bought it's as if he bought those assets before his wife passed away. And so let's take a look and understand. So what are nichsei malog? Nichsei malog are properties. There are nichsei malog and nichsei tzon barzel. Nichsei tzon barzel are assets where the husband has guaranteed the value of those assets back to the wife should he die or should they get divorced. Nichsei malog are assets where he's promised to give the underlying asset back to the wife should they die or should they get divorced, but he is not guaranteed the value of those property at all. And so, but during the lifetime of the wife and him, he gets to enjoy the produce associated with it. So now the wife has sold it. So if she sells it, effectively, when he eventually dies, he's supposed to get to eat it, the produce, as long as he's living. And when he dies, so then the buyer of that nichsei malog should, if not for the takana, should eventually get to take the property when the husband eventually dies. But the rabbis decreed that, in fact, we're going to treat the husband like a purchaser, and we're going to say that no, he gets to keep the asset. That, in fact, if she sells it, we're going to allow him to take that asset back from the purchasers so that even when he dies, it's considered part of his estate. So as a result, that shows that he's like a purchaser, because only a purchaser could take the property from the purchaser, from somebody who the wife sold the property to. Ella Amar Rav Ashi, Baal Shivyuhu Rabbanan Kiyoresh, Vishavyuhu Rabbanan Kilokeach. The answer is that it depends. The answer is that sometimes we treat the husband like an heir, and sometimes we treat him like a buyer. And we do that, Veheka de Tavale Avdule. And whatever's best for him, that's what we do. So Gabi Yovel, when it comes to Yovel, Shavyuhu Rabbanan Kiyoresh. So as a result, they treated him like an heir so that he doesn't have to give the property back at Yovel. Mipshum Seder today, because we're worried about his loss. Gabi, the Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, and in the case of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, where we say that we allow the husband to take back the malog property that the wife sold, Shavyu Rabbanim Kilokeach. So there, the rabbis treat him like a buyer. Mishum Seder Didei, again, because we're worried, we don't want him to lose out. We don't want him to have his wife sell away property and thereby cause him to lose out that property. And Gabi de Rabin, and similarly in the case of Rabin, Mipshum Seder de Almana. Yes, we're worried about the loss of the widow. So the only thing that will trump the loss of the husband is the loss of the widow who is his mother-in-law. So Shavu Rabbanan Kiyorish. So as a result, in that situation, because we're worried about the loss of the widow, well, then therefore the rabbis treated the husband like an heir, meaning that the heir needs to continue to support her. 1 second. V'hagabi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. If we're worried about the widow because she's because we're worried about her, why not be worried about you could say to the lokukos? Why not worry about the purchaser who bought the property, who bought the malog property from the wife? Vishavu Rabbana Kilokeach. Why not have? And yet the rabbis treat the husband like a purchaser. Why not worry about the person who purchased the property from the widow? And we say, well, Hassam, in that situation, Inu of Sidu Anav Shayu, the purchaser brought the loss on himself, meaning he knew Kavan to Ikabal, he knew that there was a husband. He shouldn't have bought property from a woman who was living with her husband. And so as a result, that's going to be on her. But the bottom line is we have not answered the original question. Remember, all the way when we got started, Avua Bar Ganiva asked, what happens if a woman borrows money orally, spent the money, and then got married? Is the husband like a purchaser or an heir? We haven't answered that question. Well, The answer is that it's a little complicated, but I'll go to the bottom line. The Shulchan Aruch rules that the husband is treated like a purchaser, so as a result, the creditor is going to lose out. But the Ramah adds two caveats. Number one, if the original money remains, that money must be used to pay back the lender. After all, that's essentially what we said, right? The case was uh, uh, Lavsa v'akla. She borrowed money and then she ate it, meaning she ate and consumed the money. So that money is not still hanging around. If the bag that she borrowed, the bag full of money that she borrowed was still in existence and still had all the money in it, then of course the husband would have to give back the money to the lender. The second thing is the Shulchan Aruch, I'm sorry, the Ramah details how a lender should deal with this situation. And the answer to that is that if the lender hears that a woman who's borrowed money orally from him, and there's no written document, hears that she's about to get married, if the lender complains before she marries and seeks to get paid back, then he's going to get paid back either right then and there or essentially even after they get married. But so there is a method of ensuring that the lender gets paid back. But if he doesn't do anything, then he is going to lose out because at the end of the day, we treat the husband in the manner that is in general most favorable to him, and that in this situation is treating him like a purchaser. Okay, so Hadron Allah Yesh Nochlin, Hadron Allah Yesh Nochlin, Hadron Allah Yesh Nochlin. So let's take a look, and we begin now the 9th of the 10 chapters of Bava Basra. If somebody dies and they leave behind sons and daughters, when there's plenty of assets, the sons inherit and the daughters get supported. Now, interesting, Tosos and Rashbam here. Rashbam says, Banos Yuzonu, Masha Banos Yuzonu, Mizonos, Uparnasanis Nesuin, that they get both their food and support for marriage. Now, support for marriage includes two components we're going to see. It includes both clothing and the wedding itself. Aditiv Tabagran, until she becomes a full adult. Usually that happens at the age of 12 and a half. Or until they get married. Legovern, until to a man. Kiditznan b'kesuvos, as we learned in Maseches Ksuvos, Daf Nun Bet Amabet and Nun Gimel Amabet. Okay, so that's the Rashbam. Tosos has a different opinion, right? Tosos says that no, when it says nizonu, it means only being fed. Masha Hizkir Rashbam Bahadi Mizonos Parnasa Ein Nira L'Riban. That when it comes to, when the Rashbam references that Mizonos here means Parnasa, meaning being fed, being clothed, and getting a wedding, that the Riban disagrees with that. All you're supposed to get is just the food. Mizonos, hainu achilu shtiya. When we say mizonos, we really mean food and drink. Uparnasa, and when we say parnasa, hainu mabushan, that's clothing. Utsarka and asuin, and the needs for the wedding. Utre milininu, and these are two separate, different things. Keda amar b'perach metzia ha'isha, motzia and leparnasa, that there is stuff that you can take out of people's possession in order to support the wedding and the clothing, but not for food. And often, there are plenty of places where we refer to nizonos and meparnasos and parnasa. So here, where it only refers to mizonos, so maybe that is really just food and drink. And so that is the machlokas between Tosos and the Rashbam. So that is if there's plenty of assets. Nechasem muatin, if there are relatively few assets, habanos yuzonu v'habanim yishalu al psachim, that the daughters will get fed or get supported, depending again on whether you're Rashbam or Tosos, and the sons yishalu al psachim, they have to go and beg. Admon Omer, Admon says, Bishvil sha'ani zachar hifsadti. 1 second, because I'm male, I'm going to lose out, meaning I'm supposed to get an inheritance. And in the end, even though my father has left over some assets, those assets are all going to go to the daughters. So Amar B'Shimon Gamliel, Roa Ani es Divrei Admon. It seems to me that Admon is correct. So now let's take a look at the Gemara, because the Gemara asks a very logical question. And with that, we're going to conclude. But Kama Merubin, what is considered a lot? The Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kadeshi Yazonu Mehen Elu ve'elu Shnei Masar Chodesh. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav that it means that the daughters have to have enough food, that there is food to support them for 12 months. Ki Amrita Kamrita Kamei de Shmuel. But when it was said in front of Shmuel, Amar Zu Divrei Rabbi Gamliel Bar Rabbi. That's the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rebbe. Aval Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say, Kadesh Yazonu Mehen Elu ve'elu ad sheyivgeru. It's enough money so that all the children, both the sons and the daughters, have enough food until the daughters mature, that they can be supported. And once you reach that, so then anything beyond that will get divided among the male children. Itmar Nami, and we have a statement.
Your internet was lost from the beginning of the Gemara. Just came back.
I'm sorry, my internet was lost?
It was gone. We didn't hear you.
Okay. So, all right. So, Kama Reuben. So, how much is a lot? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Kadesh Yazono Mehen Elu ve'elu Shnei Masar Chodesh. So Rav, in the name of Rav, it said that you need to be able to support the sons and the daughters for 12 months. And if you have more than that, so then the sons will get some of the assets as part of the division. Ki Amrita Kamei de Shmuel, but when it was said in front of Shmuel, Amar Zu Divrei Rabbi Gamliel Bar Rabbi, that's not the general opinion. That's not the Chachamim's opinion. That's the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rebbe. Aval Chachamim Omrim, but the Chachamim said, Kadesh Yazono Mehen Elu ve'elu ad sheyivgeru. It's enough money so that all of the children get supported until the daughters reach an age of maturity. So Itmar Nami, and indeed it was said along these lines, Kiyasa Rabbi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan said, Amrila Amar Rabbi Bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and some say it was Rabbi Barchana who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Shiyazono Mehen Elu ve'elu ad sheyivgeru, Hey Merubin, Halchos Mikan, Haray Elu Mu'atin. Now, whenever there's enough that everybody can be supported until the daughters mature, that's considered plenty of assets. But if you have less than that, that's considered a smaller amount of assets. Well, 1 second. The ileka elu ad sheyivgeru shakle lahu. As we turn to Kuf Mem, shakle lahu benos lekulhu. 1 second. Are you telling me that if there aren't enough assets so that the sons and daughters can get fed until the daughters turn 12 and a half, that all of the money now goes all to the daughters? Because remember, at the end of our Mishnah, we said that if in fact there's a mu'atin, if there's only a small amount of assets, then the daughters get fed and the sons go begging, implying that the sons get nothing. So the Gemara answers, no, Ella Amarava, Motzian Lahen Mizonos Labanos Ad Sheyivgeru Vahashar Labanim, that the daughters will get supported until they get to maturity, and everything else goes to the sons. And so that is where we'll pause for today. And tomorrow, God willing, we'll pick up with the interesting question of what happens if the sufficiency of the assets changes over time. But for that discussion, please stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Again, I'll cover tomorrow as well for Dove. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.